Welcome back to my channel. I'm joined by Jordan, Rick, and Kelly, and we're going to be talking about the Gospel of Luke, chapters 14 and 15 today. We're doing a 2-for-1 special. So, yeah, let's get into it. And it came to pass, as he went into the house of one of the chief Pharisees to eat bread on the Sabbath day, that they watched him. And behold, there was a certain man before him which had the dropsy. I didn't really know what dropsy was, but it turns out that's like edema, which is connected to congestive heart failure.
Huh.
Yeah. So someone has the dropsy. That's what we're talking about. And Jesus answering spake unto the lawyers and Pharisees, saying, Is it lawful to heal on the Sabbath day? And they held their peace. And he took him and healed him and let him go. And answered them, saying, Which of you shall have an ass or an ox fallen into a pit, and will not straightway pull him out on the Sabbath day? And they could not answer him again to these things. And he put forth a parable to those which were bidden, when he marked how they chose out the chief rooms, saying unto them, When thou art bidden of any man to a wedding, sit not down in the highest room, lest a more honorable man than thou be bidden of him. And he that bade thee, and him come and say to thee, Give this man place, and thou begin with shame to take the lowest room. But when thou art bidden, go and sit down in the lowest room, that when he that bade thee cometh, he may say unto thee, Friend, go up higher. Then shalt thou have worship in the presence of them that sit at meat with thee. For whosoever exalteth himself shall be abased, and he that humbleth himself shall be exalted. So I think this is a good opportunity to pause and reflect on what's gone before us so far. I mean, it's no great surprise, right, that he's admonishing the legalistic Pharisees for condemning him for healing a man on the Sabbath, when clearly they would do the same for a farm animal, is not a human being of greater importance in the eyes of God. I think that's pretty straightforward. This parable about, or this admonition to not exalt oneself, to always be humble, will, in a sense, provide one with an exalted status. I don't know. I just get some thoughts on that for a second. What do you guys think about what we've covered so far?
Go ahead.
No, please, you go ahead, Rick.
I mean, honestly, it's just that nature, right? Talking about somebody who feels like they're elevated to a certain level. Um, at the time, you had Roman culture, and then you also had the Jewish culture. When you went to a banquet, there was a seating arrangement. You know, um, so this man who felt like he was at a certain level placed his own seat instead of taking his assigned seat.
Right.
Or just assumed that he was supposed to sit at this one table when he probably should have been taking another table. So that idea of thinking that you're better because of whatever status you have.
Kelly, what say you?
Yeah, I think it speaks a lot about pride and self-importance. So,
Well, I think the thing that's kind of interesting about it is one might use this as like a critique, saying, like Rick is expanding upon this, giving us a few more details about individuals that are invited to a wedding and there's a certain assigned order or whatnot. Some individuals would say that passages like this keep us down in a sense, and keep us reinforcing like a power structure of sorts, keep us submissive and slavish to whatever role we're given in society, and that we need to know our place. This would be like the negative aspect of staying humble. I guess it's kind of like a Nietzschean critique that we're practicing so much humility that ultimately there's going to be this class stratification. But ultimately, we're working with something that involves the miraculous, where the first shall be last and the last shall be first. In general, I have no problem. I think the spirit of what this is trying to say is that a humble attitude will ultimately culminate in a greater reward than being selfish and greedy and placing yourself ahead of the line or ahead of everyone else in terms of a hierarchy. So that this is actually the attitude we're supposed to have in life. But I guess you can kind of see the other side of that coin. Does that bother anyone?
No.
You got to go out there and take what's yours, and Christ is holding us back. This is what Nietzsche may say, right? Nietzsche's saying, "Oh, this is putting a restraint on the Übermensch." None of you are impressed by what Nietzsche would say.
Well, the hard thing is I mean, again, thinking outside, it's God. Everything is God, so nothing is yours, right? So to assume that you have ownership, and to Christ's point in his whole ministry is that we're to submit our will. So if we take whatever type of authority that we assume that we have, or whatever type of power we assume we have, and we use it to manipulate and to are we getting ours? Are we really like taking over the world, and God is setting us back because we're going to take advantage of people, or take advantage of, uh, or take more than what we should are deserved? So I think in this parable, he's kind of telling these people like, hey, y'all are trying to use your influence and your power, and you think you have a seat. Well, guess what? You really don't. And they're using their status publicly and inserting it into their status with God. And he's trying to tell them that it's different,
Mm-hmm. This is super silly, but what popped in my head was play stupid games, win stupid prizes. Like you're playing the saddest games of men, and the prize will not be the same that can be found through God.
Right.
I
Yeah, it is. Well, the game idea sort of resonated with me too. I was picking up on that, like, aha, I win Monopoly, and like God standing out. Yeah, God standing outside of the Monopoly game is like, this is a children's game. Like, this means nothing. This is not,
enjoy your paper money.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. He even goes, this money isn't real. None of this is real. None of these avatars that you're using to play the game are real. You can polish yours up. You can be the top hat. You can be the dog. None of it matters. Like it's merely a game that will be folded up and put back into the box when this is all done.
Yeah, and I think verse 11 really kind of says it. It's just it,
Yeah.
Verse 11.
All right.
So however important you think you are, you're not.
Yeah. Congratulations. You won Monopoly. You are king of Monopoly in this house.
And now everyone's frustrated with you.
Yeah. Good luck.
Well, like in the past, the last couple of chapters, they had the rich guy, and he was trying to figure out what to do. Oh, should I expand my farm? I'm not going to be able to use this. And then he dies the next day. It's like,
right.
Oh, good. Well, great.
Yep. All right. So let's keep going here. Then said he also to him that bade him, when thou makest a dinner or a supper, call not thy friends, nor thy brethren, neither thy kinsmen, nor thy rich neighbors, lest they also bid thee again, and recompense be made. But when thou makest a feast, call the poor, the maimed, the lame, the blind, and thou shalt be blessed, for they cannot recompense thee, for thou shalt be recompensed at the resurrection of the just. So, yeah, I mean, this is a tough teaching. I think many people appreciate the spirit of this teaching, right? Like, you don't just invite the people who already have affection for you because you're doing something because you're thinking about what they can give back to you, right? Like, well, if I invite this person to my dinner party, perhaps they'll put a good word in for me with their boss and I'll get a better job, or I'll start to climb up the political ladder or something like that. Really, what you need to be doing is taking care of the starving and the sick and the infirmed. But who who who's really doing that? Like, I would say I'm not really engaging in the dinner parties for the sake of recompense, but I don't know if I'm inviting any homeless people into my house right now. So,
Well, and
I
I think it's also it's by what do you have, your increase? Are you thinking your own greatness, or are you actually thanking the source, your God, Heavenly Father, for what you have? And then it goes to that, well, how are you using what you have? How are you using your increase? You know?
right. Well, I mean, it doesn't just have to be the dinner party is, what I do. I mean, I'm not trying to make this about me, but like, you know, I I do have the opportunity to provide free education to people, right? And that's the increase that I have that I can give. So if I were to think about it in a sense, I am practicing this. It doesn't just have to be a dinner party, but I don't know. Am I just making myself feel better?
Maybe. Rick, you make a good point too about focusing on the increase you have and
Mhm.
not giving from a place of something that would destabilize your own family or yourself. I think that's a really good point to bring up. Because often these things, I think, get interpreted in such a way that, oh, we have to like give up everything of ourselves that um, sustains our own life or a family's life.
Well, it's a great question about how much of a rational calculation we have to make in these things. Because, like Christ is saying many times, go, just leave everything behind, take like a cloak.
Mm-hmm.
You're not making like a calculation. You just have to obey, like, right? And he's like, don't worry about it. If God is taking care of the lilies of the field and the birds of the air, you're set. You're going to be something will be provided for you. So it's not very practical. It's not like a practical ethic. I
So
don't know.
so we kind of, this goes into our like temple covenants. When we go to the temple, we make certain promises to do certain things, and one we say the law of consecration, right? And so what that is basically we covenant to give all of our time, talents, efforts to the building of God's kingdom. Okay. Now, yeah, if we say building God's kingdom is preaching the gospel, then, and if everybody in the world is preaching the gospel, then nobody's being fed, nobody's being taken care of, nobody's living in anything. Um, so like we look at like our jobs or our careers, how we spend time, is what we are what we doing in efforts to build God's kingdom. You know what I'm saying? So in my job, in my career, I'm an engineer. Okay. While I may not think, hey, my job is in a sense building the kingdom, but yet maybe my relationships with my fellow workers, being honest in what I'm doing, making sure that good business practices are being done. Um, in my talents, like you mentioned, Luke, you have this ability to give free education. So you're giving of that. Your everything you do is in that mind. Hey, God's given me a talent and ability. How do I help lift others? Um,
Sure.
you know, and that's how it is. Or you can look at it like if increase, you think of tithing, right? You give a tenth of whatever it is that is of your increase. That's another way we can look at things.
Right. Right. I mean, I haven't even gotten to tithing and here in the New Testament and what that means, and uh, that's a whole other subject. But yeah,
Yeah.
I hear you, Kelly. What do you have to say about this issue?
Yeah, no, I think you guys have pretty much covered anything that I had thoughts about.
Okay.
Yeah.
Something I thought was interesting, and you guys know I love a good chart.
Ooh.
Um, uh, ta- I guess this is kind of where the idea that there are multiple resurrections comes from. Talking about the resurrection of the just. In earlier installments we had talked about the first and second resurrections, and potentially other resurrections besides these first and the second ones, like talk about like the first fruits. I just want to bring this image on here so that we can see that this first resurrection, as Clarence Larkin had depicted it, includes that first resurrection saints, the ones that are resurrected here before the tribulation, and translated saints, and then there are those saints that go through the tribulation, known as the tribulation saints, and they all appear before the judgment seat of Christ on this model. So it's like, I'm not exactly sure how time is working here, like, and why they all get grouped in the, why we're saying that those are all part of the first resurrection. But this would be, I'm taking this to be the resurrection of the just, because these are like good people that are being resurrected. Whereas after the millennial reign, we see the second resurrection um, of the wicked dead who go before the great white throne judgment. We've talked about this and what the difference is between these resurrections, and if anyone, because your deeds are assessed during the great white throne judgment. And we had, I believe Kelly was there for this, we had this whole like debate about whether or not there was a destiny other than the lake of fire for the wicked dead that have been resurrected. And if the millennial reign has already happened, who are we, and are we part of this wicked dead resurrection, or who we are? We had that whole conversation, but I'm not going to get too far into it right now. But I just wanted to bring up the distinction here between the first and second resurrections. It's generally understood, and how the first resurrection may include, I'm seeing here at least 3 different types of resurrections: translated saints, first resurrection of the saints, and tribulation saints. So
I think it's interesting how just above the wicked dead and the lines going up to the great white throne judgment, it says the tares.
yeah.
And that's I have sometimes thought that the wicked dead are the tares because it talks about the harvest a lot, and all the trees that don't bear good fruit will be cut down and thrown, and let the wheat and the tares grow together until the time of the harvest. So I just think it's really interesting that that word is in there.
Yeah. That is, I had, thinking about that parable of the sower, when he talks about, them growing up together and one going to the good barn, the other being incinerated. I hadn't really thought about that until looking at this again. It's like, no, like they're literally going to be incinerated into the lake of fire. It's not like it. There's a great literalness to that parable. So, yeah, I just want to point that out. Rick, do you want to add anything there?
No, I mean, it's we definitely love our degrees of resurrections and glory.
Yeah, for sure. Well, something I wanted to ask. We were talking about recompense. Does the former ethical philosopher in me would have been really troubled by this? These things don't really bother me anymore, but Christ is telling us not to do a dinner party and invite the good crowd that can return favors to us, because we're making a calculation about recompense. Are we making calculations about recompense if we were to hold a party or a banquet and invite less savory aspects of humanity to it? Like, ultimately, we're thinking about how to get into heaven if we're doing something like that, or are we? And does it matter if we are? Like, I guess all that Kantian philosophy, I guess, rubs off on me. Like, you can't, if you're thinking about you're just making a larger calculation of recompense. Like, you may not be thinking about how someone can advance your earthly life, but you're making a calculation about what God will do for you and pay you back for feeding the criminally insane or something. Like, do we care that recompense could also be part of our calculation into helping people? Does it matter? I don't know if it
It's a
matters
good
to me.
question.
There's just like there's like a Kantian somewhere in here still.
Well, I mean, it says, so my translation says, when you give a luncheon or dinner, do not invite your friends, your brothers or relatives, or your rich neighbors. If you do, they may invite you back, and so you will be repaid. So just them, you inviting them and feeding them, and then they invite you and you feed you, and then it's sort of like that evens the field, and you're paid back. But when you give to the poor, the crippled, the lame, the blind, like if we see somebody who needs help that we don't know, that we know we'll never see again, and we help them quietly, I think that feels better to help someone that you know can't give anything in return, and you're doing it for kindness, and that's then God's going to reward you, and not man is not going to reward you by paying you back. Like, then you're going to get God's blessing for your act.
Is it wrong to want God's blessing?
That should be the priority.
I guess I agree. I'm sorry. I'm just overcoming a lot of programming right now. Because people have said to me in the past, like, "Oh, Luke, you're only into this like religion thing because of this calculation," and I don't think it. I don't think it really enters into my mind all that much. I'm not thinking, "Oh God, like I've got to avoid hell or get to the really good place, and that's why I do things."
And so what, right? I mean, say you die and there is no God and there is no reward, but what kind of a life did you live? Were you fulfilled spiritually or internally, you know?
Yeah,
But if you die and there is a God and there is a judgment, you know, what end of the calculation do you want to be at?
yeah. Well, I would say it's more. I don't even know if I take it that far. It's more of just like my conscience. Like my
Yeah,
conscience is like, if you don't do the thing that which is obviously good, like I will afflict you. So you can deal with that pain. It's not about hell.
yeah,
Hell is already happening for me.
right.
I have OCD. I can make hell on earth for myself. Um, and
Yeah,
it's like, or you can do the right thing and you won't experience the affliction and you'll feel this sense of fulfillment, which is like not being punished by your conscience. So that's about as far as my calculations go.
Yeah,
yeah.
so
Anybody else? I'm just
well, when you give to the poor, I'm just saying that phrase because that's when you give to the poor, do you give because you see them and you think, oh my gosh, like that person must be so hungry. I'm going to get them a sandwich because I want them to eat. Or do you do it because you're like, oh, here's an opportunity to get in God's good graces, right? Because I think the fruit of the spirit of caring comes from caring about that person and their needs and meeting them however you can in that moment. And for me personally, that's the satisfaction rather than like, oh, God's going to be happy with me for doing
Mhm.
this.
I like this.
Well,
That's just me.
well, and who would be grateful for the invitation?
What's that, Rick?
And so, who would be grateful for the invitation? You know, if your family or these other rich people, they just expect it, right? But if you go and you reach outside, they're going to receive that invitation, and they may be grateful. They may actually show up, whereas the other ones are like, "Oh, Luke's having another dinner party again," you know.
Mm.
You know, and then when they come, when the guests come, you know, what kind of a seat do you think that, you know, the poor or and when they think of poor, you know, what kind of seat are they going to choose? They're not going to choose a seat right next to you. They're probably going to find another table that's a little bit farther away from you because they don't feel worthy to be in that spot. And so, by you inviting them, you're welcoming them in to come be near you and with you.
I guess we should have a dinner party at some point.
Yeah, I'm hungry.
We got put this to the test.
I'll fast until it happens.
Yeah.
You might be fasting a while.
Yeah.
Okay, let's keep going. And when one of them that sat at meat with him heard these things, he said unto him, Blessed is he that shall eat bread in the kingdom of God. Then said he unto him, A certain man made a great supper and bade many, and sent his servant at supper time to say to them that were bidden, Come, for all things are now ready. And they all with one consent began to make excuse. The first said unto him, I have bought a piece of ground, and I must needs go and see it. I pray thee have me excused. And another said, I have bought 5 yoke of oxen, and I go to prove them. I pray thee have me excused. And another said, I have married a wife, and therefore I cannot come. So that servant came and showed his lord these things. Then the master of the house, being angry, said to his servant, Go out quickly into the streets and lanes of the city, and bring in hither the poor, and the maimed, and the halt, and the blind. And the servant said, Lord, it is done as thou hast commanded, and yet there is room. And the Lord said unto the servant, Go out into the highways and hedges, and compel them to come in, that my house may be filled. For I say unto you, that none of those men which were bidden shall taste of my supper. And there went great multitudes with him, and he turned and said unto them, If any man come to me and hate not his father and mother and wife and children and brethren and sisters, yea, and his own life also, he cannot be my disciple. So let's think about this for a second. This is a pretty strong saying. I think it's pretty clear that we get more of this message about the gospel first going to these, I guess, the people who would be most familiar with God, right? And this would be the Jewish nation that it's like, no, I'm too busy to accept this invitation to this new thing that you're doing. And so all the individuals that you would not expect are invited into the house. But then we get this line, if any man come to me and hate not his father and mother and wife and children and brother and sisters, yea, and his own life also, he cannot be my disciple. Is he just saying, look, you've got to make me a priority that takes precedence over any other affection that you would have for something earthly, be it the harvest of your field from your new ox or a wife or something like that? Or is there something even that's too tough for us to stand here that we have to, what does it mean to hate the father and mother and love God? Strong language.
Sacrifice. That's what he wants.
Yeah. What do you think that means? What do you think that looks like? I mean, and whoever the next line, and whosoever doth not bear his cross and come after me cannot be my disciple. What I thought was interesting about that is Christ, in a way, is already telling him how he's going to die. I'm not even sure they're aware that. I mean, there might have been some foreshadowing and some allusion to it in the previous chapter, but he's like, "Yep, I'm going to bear the cross as well." And I think it's interesting to think about: did they grasp what he was saying? Did they really understand that communication? But yeah, what does it mean to make sacrifice? What does it mean to pick up your cross? What does it mean to endure affliction for the sake of your God? I mean, I guess we know it's self-evident. It's going to be dependent on the situation that we find ourselves in. But I
Well,
mean,
that's essentially what faith is, right? I mean, you sacrifice. I'll tell you what. I would much rather be living on the beach, surfing, riding a sailboat, and doing what I want to a certain extent, than worrying about my salvation. If I could have without a care in the world. But it changes things, right? My priority now is raising a family, teaching my children how to, find the source of their salvation. Teach them about the gospel. Teach them about being good people. Teaching about, putting the things of God first outside of my own impulses or their own impulses. Once you sacrifice your will, and then that's what I think this whole thing is you sacrifice everything. Sacrifice your will for God, for Jesus Christ, for his purposes, for building his kingdom, for trying to, teach as many people, bear your testimony to as many people as you can about the Savior so that they can turn to him as well.
Summed up pretty beautifully. What about the ladies?
Well, I mean, I think we've seen several examples in Luke so far where Jesus is sort of diminishing the worldly relationships. There's an instance in, I can't remember which chapter, but they come to him and say, your mother and brothers are waiting outside. And he says, who is my mother? Who are my brothers? So,
right.
And then another one is where Jesus says to the man, come and follow me. And he says, well, first I have to bury my father. And he says, no.
He said, let the dead bury their dead.
That's right.
That's
what he
intense.
said.
Could any of us do that? I mean, that's the demand.
Yeah.
That's the demand. I mean,
I wish in that verse that he had said, let me go take care of my sick father, because then we could have got a better picture of what he meant by that. Yeah, but it's something that I think about, this whole relationship, the earthly relationship, and if that can hinder, your spiritual, where God's leading you, if, what you have to, like you said, Rick, sacrifice. But what does that look like? Yeah. Have more questions than answers on that one.
Yeah. I think what comes to mind for me too is the programming that we subconsciously take on and continue to play out that we receive from our parents often. And that gets reinforced when we are with the people who have known us the longest. It can be a lot harder to step into a new way of being or really put at the altar sort of our personality and our identity and all the things that make that up.
Yeah. Like, I wonder, you talk about the family commitments and whatnot. Is there a perfect model for what we ought to do? Like, are we all sort of in the situation where we're supposed to completely leave our families behind in order to accomplish some greater mission? Are we all supposed to be missionaries, like, throughout the rest of our lives? Like, going to completely forsaking our families and all the familial connections that we have and
selling everything we own.
Is that what we're supposed to be doing?
Well, or maybe the sacrifice is, teaching your family, being the example to your family, serving your family. And by doing that, then teaching them to serve others. You serve your family, you feed your family, then we have the banquet and we invite those who are poor, those who are needy, and we show them the Savior. We show them, and then in turn, they do the same thing. It's about living, it's not necessarily about preaching. What are they doing in their life? Like Jesus, yeah, that was his ministry, right? His ministry was to preach. We are to take his teachings and apply them to our lives and to spread it that way. Unless you're called to be an apostle, then you serve God. You let the dead bury their dead if that's getting in the way of you providing for your family and taking care of that spiritual purpose.
Well, there's a lot of work to be done on the home front. Clearly, you don't have to travel to a far-flung country to do effective work.
Yeah.
So, things to keep in mind. All right. For which of you, intending to build a tower, sitteth not down first and counteth the cost, whether he have sufficient to finish it? Lest haply, after he hath laid the foundation and is not able to finish it, all that behold it begin to mock him, saying, This man began to build and was not able to finish. Or what king, going to make war against another king, sitteth not down first and consulteth, whether he be able with 10,000 to meet him that cometh against him with 20,000? Or else, while the other is yet a great way off, he sendeth in an ambassage, and desireth conditions of peace. So likewise, whosoever he be of you, that forsaketh not all that he hath, he cannot be my disciple. So, is that true? Do we make this calculation that when we are practicing faith, that everything is to be given up for the sake of being a part of this faith? Do we really make that sort of calculation? I'm not sure very many people do who find themselves within the visible church of Christ. I'm not saying, I'm just saying that I'm not really sure it works like that, or maybe it does. It seems like it's more of a gradual sort of thing, where people get deeper and deeper into it. And would we be saying that people who are on their journey and growing in their faith relationship with Christ are not properly disciples? What do you guys think? Do we have this moment where we're like, yeah, no matter what, is that the real moment of conversion? That if pressed, if your back was against the wall, you would be prepared to forsake everything? And I guess I see the logic and the rationality to that. Personally, I guess I would now at this stage of my life, but there were many nascent stages that led up to that.
I think about it like Adam and Eve weren't told to go out and acquire as much land as you possibly can. They were commanded to, fruit, multiply, replenish, subdue. They were stewards over the land. And I think that same commandment is given to us, right? So we're here to be stewards. We're not here to own. If we take on the idea that we're here to just take care of, then I think this pursuit of ownership or the ability to sacrifice would be much easier. If my house in my mind belongs to God, or if I've entrusted it in a trust that it's goes to the kingdom of Israel or whatever, then I don't own it. It's not mine. I don't, so to give it back, then it's gone. Nothing is mine. Everything I have is God's, or because God gave it to me to take care of. If I
Mhm.
lose it, it's because God doesn't want me to have it anymore, or because I didn't take care of the property that I was given to be a steward over. Um, I think it's a lot of it probably has to do with mindset.
What do you think, Kelly?
Well, I was just thinking about what you were saying, Rick, and I wonder, and I know this is another verse altogether, but when you said about, well, if you don't take care of it, well, what about if a thief comes and steals it? Like, store up your treasures in heaven and not on earth where moths and men come in and steal. So how does that fit in with what you were thinking at all? Like, can you factor that into your...
Well, if it's stolen, then it wasn't mine, and the wrath goes on to the one who stole it. It's their responsibility to either return that property or they pay the consequences.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I think the idea that everything that we have is on loan from God is kind of an idea that is pervasive throughout this gospel, and if it's taken away, there's a reason for it metaphysically.
Well, we're going to be doing it in the prodigal son here. We're going to see exactly how it happens to property.
It feels like a big trick too. Again, it's the monopoly money. It's a big trick and trap to make that something it isn't.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. 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 It's like clinging to something that's a child's game.
Yeah.
Salt is good, but if the salt have lost his savor, wherewith shall it be seasoned? It is neither fit for the land nor yet for the dunghill, but men cast it out. He that hath ears to hear, let him hear. Just I'd heard this, we've all heard this, like salt of the earth people, right? What exactly that meant. But I guess here in this aphorism, the salt are kind of like these good disciples that are capable of preserving the teachings of Christ. And if that salt expires or no longer is capable of fulfilling its function, then in a sense, these individuals, the salt has to be cast out. So, and I guess this is kind of how we tell who the good and bad disciples are. A lot of what's been covered in this chapter so far.
Yeah, I have a JST for that as well.
Oh yeah, feel free to share.
So this is kind of goes right before verse 34, but it says, "Then a certain of them came unto him, saying, Good master, we have Moses and the prophets, and whosoever shall live by them shall have not shall he not have life. And Jesus answered, saying, Ye know not Moses, neither the prophets, for if ye had known them, ye would have believed on me. For to this intent they were written, for I am sent that ye might have life. Therefore I will taken it unto salt, which is good. But if the salt has lost its savor, wherewith shall it be seasoned?"
Nice.
Yeah, just more of the reason why the salt was kind of thrown in there was just more of a question, and if you don't recognize, if you don't even recognize the teachings that you've been teaching, you've lost it. And I
Sure.
think that's Jesus is constantly in the past has thrown that at them. Like, you guys are, you don't even understand the teaching, you know.
Mhm.
Yep. Well, I think we've pretty accurately covered chapter 14. The way I'm thinking about doing chapter 15 here, I think this would be a good opportunity if someone else wanted to read chapter 15 for the rest of the group. I don't have to do it. So would someone else like to and just read it straight through?
I can read it.
Sure.
Do you prefer, excuse me, do you prefer the King James, which you have on the screen, or the one that I'm working with, which is the NIV?
I think either is fine. I think the point is preserved. I mean, for the sake of consistency, maybe the KJV, but if you feel more comfortable with the NIV,
Your choice.
it's your choice.
Yeah, I can do the King James if you can scroll it up as I go along. Perfect.
Mhm.
So, then drew near unto him all the publicans and sinners for to hear him. And the Pharisees and scribes murmured, saying, This man receiveth sinners and eateth with them. And he spake this parable unto them, saying, What man of you, having 100 sheep, if he lose one of them, does not leave the 99 in the wilderness and go after that which is lost until he find it? And when he hath found it, he layeth on his shoulders, rejoicing. And when he cometh home, he calleth together his friends and neighbors, saying unto them, Rejoice with me, for I have found my sheep which was lost. And number 7, I say unto you that likewise joy shall be in heaven over one sinner that repenteth, more than over 99 just persons which need no repentance. Either what woman having 10 pieces of silver, if she lose one piece, doth not light a candle and sweep the house, and seek diligently until she find it? And when she hath found it, She calleth her friends and her neighbors together, saying, Rejoice with me, for I have found the piece which I had lost. Likewise, I say unto you, there is joy in the presence of the angels of God over one sinner that repenteth. And he said, A certain man had 2 sons, and the younger of them said to his father, Father, give me the portion of goods that falleth to me. And he divided unto them his living. And not many days after, the younger son gathered all together and took his journey into a far country, and there wasted his substance with riotous living. And when he had spent it all, there arose a mighty famine in that land, and he began to be in want. And he went and joined himself to a citizen of that country, and he sent him into his fields to feed swine. And he would fain have filled his belly with the husks that the swine did eat, and no man gave unto him. And when he came to himself, he said, How many hired servants of my father's have bread enough and to spare, and I perish with hunger? I will arise and go to my father, and will say unto him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and before thee, and am no more worthy to be called thy son. Make me as one of thy hired servants. And he arose and came to his father. But when he was yet a great way off, his father saw him, and had compassion, and ran and fell on his neck and kissed him. And the son said unto him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and in thy sight, and am no more worthy to be called thy son. But the father said to his servants, Bring forth the best robe, and put it on him, and put a ring on his hand, and shoes on his feet. And bring hither the fatted calf, and kill it, and let us eat and be merry. For this my son was dead, and is alive again. He was lost, and is found. And they began to be merry. Now his elder son was in the field, and as he came and drew nigh to the house, he heard music and dancing. And he called one of the servants, and asked what those things meant. And he said unto him, Thy brother is come, and thy father hath killed the fatted calf, because he hath received him safe and sound. And he was angry, and would not go in. Therefore came his father out, and entreated him. And he answering said to his father, Lo, these many years do I serve thee, neither transgressed I at any time thy commandment, and yet thou never gavest me a kid, that I might make merry with my friends. But as soon as thy son was come, which hath devoured thy living with harlots, thou hast killed for him the fatted calf. And he said unto him, Son, thou art ever with me, and all that I have is thine. It was meet that we should make merry and be glad, for this thy brother was dead and is alive again, and was lost and is found.
Very powerful, right? So this is one of the most memorable and enduring set of parables that we have in the New Testament. The first 2, the sheep that gets separated from the flock, and there's rejoicing about the shepherd being able to return it, and the woman who loses the coin and then discovers it and celebrates this discovery and goes to great lengths to find it. Conceptually, that clarifies to us like what our relationship to God is. If we are the lost coin or we are the lost sheep, it's not like we go to the back of the line and we're going to be shamed because we got lost or because we got separated. Ultimately, we will be brought into communion and reunion as if we never left. And in some ways, it seems like even celebrated. It seems that way, though it's not the case, because it would have happened to anyone had they been the lost one. Would have, in some ways, you're celebrated for returning. This is a great incentive for individuals to reconcile with God, so they don't feel like they're going to be lectured or admonished or convicted in some way for what they did. And then in this third parable with the prodigal son, we get a lot more detail, right? Like that we probably didn't necessarily need to have, spending the money on harlots, feasting, eating pig slop. He became so destitute, and the level of desperation that it took to come back. The envy that the older brother had for the son that went, or for the brother that went away. Yeah, I mean, it's just a very powerful lesson. I mean, we can sit here and talk about it a lot. I'm not sure what we could add, but I guess we'll try. How did you guys feel about it?
As I was reading it, which I have read this verse numerous times in my life, what stood out to me was that when the son was away and, doing all the things he shouldn't be doing, that he was dead, but he wasn't dead. So,
Mm-hmm.
like, I'm intrigued by that spiritual death, or
Mm-hmm.
the thought of that making you dead, living that way. So, and then coming alive again. I just really like that.
What I know it takes some time to do some exegesis on that, but how does that? What do you take from that? Is it just a clever turn of phrase, or do you think there's something deeper going on there?
Well, I sort of have an affinity for the dead in the Bible.
Yeah,
And
yeah. We talked about let the dead bury the dead. Like,
yeah,
what are we talking about? Like, these individuals are still walking around. They still have some movement in them. They're not dead. Like, and I think if it's one of those things, like if you really thought about it, I think it gets really deep.
absolutely. Yeah, it's a spiritual death, I believe. That's what it's referring to. Um, yeah, that's my opinion for now.
It raises an interesting question about what spiritual death is.
And resurrection.
Mm-hmm. And conversion, yes. What about you, Rick?
So I think it's neat how just the three parables themselves. So it starts off with 1 in 100, right? The next one is 1 in 10,
Mm-hmm.
and the
Mm,
next one is 1 to 1, or 2 to 1. And even just on the level of like the sheep, it's like this property that's lost. We're gonna, even though I have a lot, I'm still gonna look for this little one. And then the woman losing the coin, that's like her dowry, right? That's the only money that she has, that she brings into the marriage, and if the marriage is dissolved, she still gets to keep. Um, so that coin is very important, and the effort that she takes to even that little bit, that 1 in 10. Then the prodigal son, I mean, the dad, he gave him his inheritance, which probably involved land. So then the dad had to sell the land, but anybody that you know believes and has the same Hebrew traditions isn't going to buy the land off of them because it's not their inheritance. So now he sells it to an outsider. So there's an outsider in their community. So the dad has sacrificed many things in order to give him his inheritance before his inheritance is due. Then the son goes and does what he wants, and then when he comes back, the son who stayed with him the whole time is like, well, what the heck, like, I've been good, I've done all this stuff, you didn't kill a fatted calf for me, we're not having parties and doing all this stuff for me. And the response is like, you've always had me,
Mm-hmm.
I've always been here for you, you were never lost. And he didn't even recognize that blessing that he had in his life, and all he can see. So maybe he's on his, even though you're there, you still may be at the risk of a spiritual death because you're too jealous of the brother.
I think it's a great thing that you point out there, Rick, is that the third parable has another factor in it that the first two don't. Like, we're not seeing things from the perspective of the sheep. They're like, hey, we stayed where we're supposed to, or the coins that were like, yeah, we didn't get lost. But this, we have the brother, and like you said, like, he's unable to perceive the blessing that being faithful provided for him. So, yeah, I think it's worth perhaps drawing our attention to him or bringing our attention to him and thinking about his relationship to God and his openness to the blessing, like you said.
And it's not his place to determine who gets what blessing. It's the Father's determination. It's the Father's choice to choose how he blesses his children and what he blesses them with.
That's right.
I like that.
You want to add anything, Jordan?
I don't have anything to add. I think that pretty well covers it.
Well, does anybody want to say anything else in closing? I mean, I feel pretty satisfied with everything that we've discussed today.
Yeah, I do too.
Okay. All right. Well, then we'll bring this one to a close. And I want to thank everybody for joining me today.
Yeah.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you.
All right. Next week, guys.